My name is Louis Bois-le-Duc. When I was born, I guess it's the Duke of the Woods, the Duke of the Bois, but everybody calls me Louis Bois-le-Duc. And I was born circa 1739 in a little town about 20 miles downriver from Quebec in Canada. As a lot of the people that came to this area were from Quebec, Montreal, Three Rivers, those kind of places, and come down. And when I was about 20 years old, General Wolfe came up the river, up the St. Lawrence, and he was going to raid Quebec. Well, he stopped at our village first, and the priest convinced us to kind of try to repel him. Well, his army was much bigger, and he ended up burning our town down, killing our priest and scalping him. And I left that country for what we call the Illinois country. The Illinois country was named after the Native American tribe, the Illinois, and it was the Illinois country on the Illinois side and the Illinois country on this side. It's called the Pas du Illinois. And I didn't have a lot of money, so I wasn't one of the wealthy ones to start out. I helped mine lead about 20 miles, 30 miles from here, helped people in their farmlands raise wheat and corn, and then did also some other things. And then about 5 years after I was here, I fell in love with a young lady named Agathe Gauvreau, and we married. We put our cross, not a mark with an X, a mark with a cross, because we were all Catholic, and on our civil marriage record and our church marriage record, and we still have those in the books just right down the street here. Very soon we had our first child, Elizabeth, and about 18 months later we had Louis Jr., Louis Bois-le-Duc Fils is the way you say it in French, and then about another 2 years, about 1775, we had our third child, Etienne, and then a year later we had our fourth child, Jean-Baptiste. Unfortunately, he died in infancy. And about 3 months after he was born, Agathe died. And I wasn't here when she died. I was down in New Orleans buying goods for my merchant shop. And so I didn't get to say goodbye to her unless I walked through the cemetery here. And unfortunately, our graves aren't marked, so I wandered a lot trying to figure out where she was. But life had to go on. I had 3 young children, so I fell in love with a young girl, 20 years my junior, and I married her. And 6 months later, we had our first child. I think there was a little hanky-panky or something before that, but that wasn't uncommon. And so we had a child, Henri, and then we had another child named Jean-Baptiste again, which was a very common name. Here in St. Genevieve, you didn't celebrate your birthday on the actual birthday. You celebrated it on your saint's day. So if your name was Francois or Jean-Baptiste, everybody in town almost was celebrating their birthday on one of those 2 days, because that was the most common name. And Mary was the common name for ladies. Well, by this time, I was really getting to be well-to-do. I was the biggest producer of wheat and corn in the upper Louisiana. We were selling corn to Natchez and wheat down to New Orleans, Mobile, up to St. Louis. Down south, they couldn't grow wheat, and the French loved their bread. They didn't like corn. They thought it was only fit for animals and enslaved people. But when the floods came up and killed our wheat crop, guess what we ate? Corn. So again, I was doing very well. Became an upstanding citizen of the town. And in 1785, the original town site was about 3 miles south of here, right on the river. And the river came up and was up to the top of the chimneys of the houses. So we decided, well, we're going to have to move. Well, we didn't do it right away. We got some land down south of Cape Girardeau, and to raise some grain down there. We got a place up on the hills to raise cattle. And about 1793, I moved up here to St. Genevieve and built a house. And my wife, Marie Courtois, came with me, and her brother lived right behind me. So it kind of was natural to buy in that part of town. And actually, you can still see my house. You can visit it. It is a National Historic Landmark. It was restored by the Colonial Dames of America in the state of Missouri in 1956. And it's probably the best restored mid-Mississippi Valley vertical log house in the United States. So you get a chance sometime to go through there. It's well done. You can hear a little bit more about his story there and the furniture and all of that sort of thing. But I lived to about 1815, pretty old for a guy around here. Most of them died pretty young. My wife did outlive me, but when I died, they did an inventory of all my estate, all the land, all the forks, all the knives, all the plates, all of that sort of thing. And half of it went to my wife, half of it went to my children. And that was the way they did it with the French. It was called the coutume de Paris, the customs of Paris. And sometimes the surviving spouse would not be the guardian of the children. Sometimes they would have like an uncle or on the other side of the family look out for their portion of that estate. And so it was eventually divided up, and my wife, Marie, finally dies in 1826 and is buried here in the cemetery also. So that's the story of Louis Bolduc, one of the upper class of St. Genevieve. By the way, he was illiterate. He could not sign his name. He would always sign with a cross. It's a mark and his name underneath it. The priest would write it, and then he would put his little cross. He was good friends of Francois Valley Sr., who also was an illiterate. He was probably even wealthier than I was. But I was pretty wealthy. This Irishman came to town. He was a Thomas Madden. He was pretty cocky, as some Irishman can be. And he was pretty well-to-do. He was a surveyor. And he challenged me one day of who's the richest guy in St. Genevieve. And I just turned to one of my servants and said, go in the basement and get the bushel basket. And he brings out a bushel basket of silver. Thomas just said, I give up. You're richer than me. And that's the story of Louis Bolduc. Any questions?
So originally, were the burial sites marked?
No.
And then they just...
No. All the records only say they were buried in the cemetery of the parish. Now, there's about 275 tombstones here. This is a communal cemetery. It is not just a Catholic cemetery, though most of the Catholics are in the bottom half here. But it's we have Protestants, we have Odd Fellows, which was a fraternal organization up in the corner. We have Native Americans, and you're going to get to talk to one who's buried here, as is his daughter. African Americans, we have graves for 2 enslaved individuals still existing. There was a steamboat explosion in 1852, and they were buried here in a mass grave. And by 1880, they decided that every time they dig, they would run into bones, and so they said, we can't bury anybody else here.
I am Wasa Kusenga, Grand Chief of the Peoria. From Mother Earth we come, to Mother Earth we return. On March 30th of 1794, I returned to Mother Earth. In 1797, my daughter followed me, and we were both buried in this cemetery somewhere. The Peoria tribe was a grand nation of over 1,000. Our land stretched from the Great Lakes down the Mississippi into Illinois and stretched over into Indiana. But because of war with the Huron and the Shawnee, we were forced south. The English and the encroaching Americans forced us west of the Mississippi. We came to St. Genevieve and lived among our friends, the French, who treated us very well. We taught the French which plants to use for medicine. We taught the French which plants were good to eat. We taught them how to hunt. The French taught us trades of blacksmithing so we can make our own things out of iron. They taught us how to cook using iron pots. They taught us how to make clothing out of white man's cloth. Any questions for me? Thank you for coming.
So my name is Dennis McGill, and you are now in the Irish slums of the cemetery here. Not a whole heck of a lot is known about me, so I can make things up as I go along. And being Irish, I intend to take full advantage. So all you know about me is that I'm Dennis McGill. I'm a native of Killybegs, Ireland, and I died June 22nd, 1844, at the ripe old age of 33. So that's it. So this is, in my opinion, the most amazing tombstone in the whole cemetery, because it was erected by the shopmates of the deceased, A.O. LeGray and Company contributors. And up here are the names of all my shopmates, none of which is a fancy St. Genevieve name. In fact, we can't figure out anything about any of my shopmates. But this is a heck of a monument. And I want to talk a little bit about Killabegs because obviously it's very important to me. So Killabegs is in County Donegal on the west coast of Ireland. It is also the largest and has been the largest fishing town in Ireland forever. A ship from the Spanish Armada beached there. The good people of Killabegs fed the Spanish sailors, got the ship repaired. The ship left and promptly ran aground in a storm, resulting in the deaths of 1,300 Spaniards. So Killabegs was solidly Catholic, and in the late 1700s, early 1800s, it was very active in resistance to British rule and in seeking what was called Catholic emancipation, giving Catholics rights. And they weren't very successful until Napoleon came along, and all these Irish soldiers were needed. And suddenly the British become much more tolerant about Irish Catholics. They're allowed to take communion while they're in the British Army, and things are looking a little bit better for them. But not well. The British reneged on their promises in 1800. But by 1820, 1830, the Duke of Wellington was the hero. He recognized the Irish soldiers basically won the battles for him, and so he was in favor of Catholic emancipation. We don't really know when I got here, but chances are I was a stonemason when I arrived, or became a stonemason, or was a stonemason's son. And stonemasons, up until about 1840, built houses, fancy houses, and many of them were Irish because they learned their trade building fancy houses for the British. And you can see remnants of stone houses all over St. Genevieve, the famous one being the Academy building up on the top, which is beautiful stonemason work. Our first church that wasn't made out of logs was a stone church right where the Catholic Church is right now. And of course you had the old cathedral in St. Louis, which is a wonderful piece of stonemasonry from the 1830s. So we were building houses for wealthy people. And Father Maxwell encouraged Irishmen who had these skills to come to the St. Genevieve area. But by the 1830s, 1840s, stone was going out of fashion. The Germans were coming in. The Germans loved brick. The Americans and the English loved brick as well. So what's a stonemason to do? Well, he's going to turn to building fancy monuments in cemeteries like this. And Dennis McGill and LeGray and Company are a prime example of that transition from building houses to building monuments. And while this is described as being erected in memory of me, it's really also a marketing ploy, because this monument is very different than a lot of the monuments you'll see. For one thing, most of the monuments are one big piece of stone. This was cheaper and easier to erect. It's this here, followed by some legs, followed by a piece of stone, followed by another piece of stone, followed by another piece of stone. So you didn't need to hew one tremendous piece of stone. It was marginally lighter, and it was, you won't see any one that's like this where you can see through the monument in the whole cemetery. I've looked around and I haven't found one in the whole cemetery. So LeGray and Company was basically advertising their skills. And I tell this story a lot, so I don't know if I'm repeating myself, but I want to tell you a little bit about Mr. LeGray and LeGray and Company. Mr. LeGray, Antoine LeGray, got wealthy in the traditional, or at least easiest, American fashion he married a wealthy woman. And the wealthy woman he married was the granddaughter of the valley of the commandant's house down there, the granddaughter of the last commandant. And Mr. LeGray managed to get a hold of some land. I think he inherited in Bonne Terre, and that land happened to have lead on it, and that land became St. Joe Lead. And Mr. LeGray sold his interest in the property in 1860 to a consortium of New York businessmen. And so he made a lot of money, and I believe he basically used this as marketing. And I want to point out one other thing. This odd little pillar over here that doesn't have any name carved on it. So pillars like this, if they were jagged, and this one does have a crack in it, but if they were jagged, it would be a sign of somebody who died at a young age, maybe, teens or younger. If it had a flat top and nothing on it, that typically meant they couldn't find the body. And so we don't know what this was, we don't have any idea, and I think it was basically just a cenotaph that was put up to show we can do cenotaphs also. But it is all a mystery, and the thing I like about this one is it's not a fancy person, and I just keep thinking, when I die, well, I guess I am, but when you die, how many of you are going to have your shopmates carve their names into a monument this size to show how much they respected you?
Do you think Christopher Madewell was his real name, or do you think that was just...
Do I think what?
Do you think Christopher Madewell is his real name, or do you think it's just like we make
You
good
mean like
monuments?
done right?
Yeah, like done right.
Craftwell and
Craftwell
done right?
yeah.
I don't know. I don't think they were that keen to marketing, but maybe. I mean, Madewell, you have a good point. I don't think they were that clever because I don't see a done right on this. But yeah, maybe that's a marketing ploy.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about that. Maybe that's why I can't find a Madewell
Right.
historic records. They never really existed.
Yeah.
You haven't seen my brother John, have you? Having such a tough time finding him. He's the whole reason I'm here in St. Genevieve. We're not from here originally. My name is Israel Dodge. My brother and I were raised in Canterbury, Connecticut. We both fought in the Revolutionary War. I joined the Continental Army at the age of 15. By the age of 17, I had fought in the Battle of Brandywine, which is a bloody, bloody battle. I eventually rose to the ranks of second lieutenant in the Continental Army. My brother was ranked ahead of me. And for that, when George Rogers Clark, some years later, conquered the Illinois Territory, my brother was made the Indian agent here. So we followed him. That's me and my wife, Nancy. You haven't seen Nancy around here either. I don't know why I can't remember where she is. Anyways, in the years that followed, we fought the Osage in Illinois. Bloody people. And to have a chance at a more peaceful life, about 10 years later, we decided to jump the river and we settled New Bourbon, which is just 4 miles south of St. Genevieve. During that time, we had a wonderful life raising our children, raising cattle, raising corn. In 1804, at the age of 44, I was appointed sheriff of the territory by William Henry Harrison, who was the governor of Illinois at the time, but eventually became our 9th president. Now that I think, I don't think I lasted very long as sheriff. That's right, I can remember now. 2 years later, in 1806, at the age of 46, I was killed. Had something to do with the French not liking Americans in their territory. I was buried somewhere around here. I don't have a headstone. My wife, some years later, was buried here without a headstone as well. And I don't think my brother was buried here at all, which is why I'm stuck here searching. Thank you so much for listening to my story.
Okay. Well, this isn't a spooky thing. We are
it's fun, though.
spirits representing people that are buried beneath us.
It's fun though, as far as historical.
Yes, yes. So let me give you a little history. I am Elizabeth Alexander Ralphie Lynn. Beside me is resting my husband, the esteemed Dr. Lewis Fields Lynn, also later to become a U.S. Senator. He was born when George Washington was president, so that gives you a perspective how long ago we're talking, a very long time ago. My families are from over in Washington County, which is a county or two over from where we stand. My parents, as well as my brother, are buried over there in the Caledonia Methodist Church, Methodist Cemetery. My husband comes from Kentucky. After he got a little grown, he studied medicine. He went to Philadelphia to learn medicine, and then he moved here. He had a brother living here, and so he moved here and started practicing. We married, and we met and married in 1818, prior to Missouri even becoming a state. Missouri did not become a state until 1821. So you can imagine we were among the early settlers. If you're from the area, you would be familiar with the names I'm about to tell you. The Dunklins, the Scotts, the Bentons, the Kennetts. These are all either a town or county right here in southeast Missouri. We were friends with them, as well as General Andrew Jackson, who was later to become a president. General Andrew Jackson appointed my husband to a commission of 3 people who evaluated the land grants from the Louisiana Purchase. So when the Louisiana Territory was purchased, there were a set of land grants that were handed to the United States, and they were from France and Spain. They were the two that kind of went back and forth owning this territory. So my husband was among a group of 3 that evaluated these land grants to determine if they were legitimate. My husband was extremely esteemed by all people for 2 reasons. His profession as a doctor and as a senator. As a doctor, he was not afraid to go out and help people. You might have heard of the pandemic cholera. He was a doctor in those early years of that first pandemic. He was at the forefront, educating people, telling them not to be afraid. He would go out into homes where the whole families were dying. One night we're sitting in our living room, get a knock on the door. There's a man there telling us that a man with cholera had been thrown off the steamboat and pushed off into the bank there because he had cholera. The man said nobody knows him and he's going to die. You're the only one that can help him. Of course, my husband and his friend, they go get him. While they're gone, my friends and neighbors come to my door as a mob with torches and fire. They're screaming they ought to burn my house down. It was very scary. I saw in their eyes that they were scared too. Fortunately, my husband had sent somebody ahead of time and he yelled, "They're coming!" So the mob dispersed. My husband was able to bring the gentleman in. Unfortunately, the man did die, but he did not die alone. For my husband's courage and strength, we were able to be there during his last hours. That's just one testimony to my husband's character. As a senator, he pushed for westward expansion across the state of Missouri and into the Oregon Territory. He put forth legislation. He was a U.S. senator. He put forth legislation that asked that people get property for moving out there and developing the territories. They loved it. This territory is much bigger than that little state we now have. This area includes Iowa, Kansas, parts of Missouri, and Oregon, I think, on that part. But each of those 4 states said, "We love you so much, we're going to name a county for you." In Missouri, we have Lynn County over near the Ozarks, and then the other 3 states. Oregon loved him so much, they named an entire town after him. So unfortunately, by the age of 48, my husband died of heart issues. My son also passed before me, a year before me. He was living in St. Louis like his father. He became a doctor. He died. We wanted to get him down here, but the Mississippi River was frozen. We had to wait till the spring thaw. So he was buried up there in a very famous cemetery, the Bellefontaine Cemetery. He's actually put in a vault. I personally thought so highly of my husband, I wrote a book about him. I was able to place his picture in my book, so we're now all able to see him and how handsome he was. I thank y'all for visiting with us, and I hope to see you again next year. Good luck on y'all's trip, rest of your trip.
I am Jean Ferdinand Roger. I was born in France, in Nantes, France, in 1777. Died here in St. Genevieve in 1864. I have known as a businessman, civic leader. I was the first mayor of St. Genevieve when the city was incorporated back in the 1800s. But my story begins in Nantes and begins with this document. What leads to my being here in St. Genevieve. This is a business contract, a partnership between myself and a gentleman named John James Audubon. You know the name, I see, from your nods. So, our fathers were businessmen, associates in France, in Nantes. And as we came to be young adults, they thought it a good idea to get their sons out of the country, for one thing, because there was a very good chance that we were going to be conscripted into the army. At the same time, our fathers already had business practices established with New York and Philadelphia, and were already trading European French-made goods, wines, laces, ladies' clubs, and the like, with these houses in New York. And they thought by sending their sons over here, it would be a prudent business move to have me and John James continue that practice and perhaps develop that overseas trade back and forth and discovering things. But our first order of business is as outlined in Article 2 of this contract that was signed in Nantes in 1806. Says we are first to go to Mill Grove in Pennsylvania. Mill Grove was a 200-plus acre farm that had been originally owned by Captain Audubon, and then my father bought into it. And they had a gentleman named DeCosta who was managing the property. And DeCosta had been continually asking for additional influxes of funds to develop the property more, especially since they had discovered lead on the property, and there was the potential for a lead mine within the property. So it was up to John James, Audubon, and myself to first visit that and see how the property was being managed, and whether or not DeCosta's requirements for funds were really legitimate or not. And so, of course, he did not appreciate a 28-year-old and a 21-year-old checking his books and looking over his shoulder at the way he's handling the place. And it was an uncomfortable situation at best. And we determined, based on this contract, and we had to be unanimous, Audubon and myself, in our decision, that we thought it best to go ahead and let DeCosta have the farm, buy our shares, our 50% share in the property, and we took those funds then and pursued other avenues. Took us down the Ohio River to Louisville, Kentucky, where we established business for approximately 3 years there, mercantile trade and all. But then we decided to move on, and so we did so, continuing down the Ohio with a brief stop in Henderson, Kentucky, and then from there let's explore this new Louisiana territory that we've heard so much about, because there's bound to be opportunity there. So we do not arrive, unfortunately, as early as we'd hoped. We got stuck in ice at the mouth of the Ohio, right at the Mississippi River on what is the Missouri side of the Mississippi, because of ice flows and the river freezing over. I went nearly stir crazy because I wanted to get on with this business, and now we're being held up by who knows how long before we get to St. Genevieve or St. Louis. Audubon, on the other hand, was perfectly happy going out in the woods and hunting and trapping. Thank goodness for that, because perhaps we might have starved that winter without his expertise in trapping and hunting game. So, with that, finally the ice breaks and we're able to arrive here in St. Genevieve in February of 1811. The fact that we had 300 barrels of whiskey with us for trade and sale, and gunpowder, plus various other sundry items to trade, established us quickly as entrepreneurial business partners here in St. Genevieve. Even though the Boldukes and the Valets and the Pratts all were had been in business for some time, them being French. But that's a point that was for me the selling point at St. Genevieve. This was it. They spoke French here. I was having trouble with my English the previous 4 years since we'd arrived here in the United States. And so for me, this was like a piece of home, a piece of France, right here. Audubon, unfortunately, did not feel the same about it. And I'm not exactly sure why. We did have our differences related to how he conducted business, or how he didn't conduct business, as compared to my business savvy. For me, he spent way too much time out in the woods, hunting and drawing, and didn't spend nearly the hours that I thought he needed to. But there were perhaps other reasons that he did not like to stay here, and that is all left as supposition. Anyway, Audubon returns to Henderson, where he has his wife and a child, and from there he goes on his way and pursues his own career and becomes the artist and ornithologist that we know him as today. Publishes his 400-plus page tome of his wildlife drawings, of his bird drawings, American birds. Whereas I immediately established business practice here in St. Genevieve, working out of my house initially and then buying properties. And met Constance within 2 years, and we began our family of 10 children, 8 boys and 2 girls. Their sons carried on the family business trade. You know the name Rozier from Rozier's Country Mart here in St. Genevieve, from Rozier's store in Perryville, Missouri. It's interesting to me how the Rozier name, of course, has carried on as it should be, because I still have descendants that are carrying on the same trades that I began generations ago. Not to mention that there was a Rozier Bank here at one time. Some of my sons went into law practice. I was the first mayor of St. Genevieve when the town was incorporated. Audubon, on the other hand, was here only a mere 6 weeks. Yet we celebrate him as a native son and plaster his name on restaurants and senior living apartments. So anyway, that is that part of my story. But I can't keep you too long because there's many other spirits to visit.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. Henri Johnny, Augustus Silent, was born in 1808. My father, Francois, and my grandfather ran the Green Tree Tavern right over here, which is still standing. Where are you folks from? Evansville, Indiana. Been there. I got some ancestors that went over there to. Where did they fight that Civil War? That Revolutionary War battle of Vincennes. They went all the way from here to George Rogers Clark and fought the British over there. Yeah, you betcha. Anyway, in 1829, I married the girl of my dreams, Odell Leclerc. We moved to Fredericktown, which is about 40, 50 miles south of here. We had 8 children, and I was a merchant. Had a good living until the war started in '61. See, there was this Confederate general, M. Jeff Thompson, who they called the Swamp Fox, because the Yankees could never catch him once he got into the swamps down there in Deja. He got the idea to go up here to DeSoto and burn the railroad bridge. Once the Yankees found out that had happened, they went after him. Caught him in Fredericktown. Even though he was outnumbered 2-1, turned around and whatever little ambush for them boys. Took up a big fight. He bloodied him, but then he went on south. And at that point, the Yankees had total control of the town. Didn't have control of the roads, especially at night. It was dangerous to travel. There's tons of outlaws. It just gave those outlaws a reason to exist. But in town, anybody who leaned to the south, like we did, we had to take this oath of allegiance. And people in your time period have it made. You can complain about anything you want. So you don't even have to be part of a political party. You can bitch about anything all day long. Back then, you couldn't do that, especially in Missouri. That was considered aiding and abetting the enemy. You couldn't say, Lincoln's a fool. I don't like the way this war is going. You couldn't even say, God, the bloody suffering of all these boys getting shot to pieces. Something ought to be done. That's enough to get you locked up and thrown in jail. So you had to watch what you did, watch what you said, watch what you said to who. So anyway, now that the Yankees were in control, they abused me left and right. Took stuff out of my store, didn't pay for it, insulted me.
he was a terrible friend. So in 1864, in September, General Sterling Price came up to Arkansas for 12,000 cavalry. He put them all together with Fredericktown. Well, all that did was let them rip us off too. We were all happy for a minute. I lost everything in my store. I lost all my livestock. I lost all my foodstuffs for the winter. Tons of people starved to death because the army cleaned them out. They wound up straggling into towns trying to get food to live. Luckily, I stashed a rifle and some money out in the woods and nobody found it. After the war was over, I moved back to St. John. Borrowed some money, had some credit, had some friends, started another store. Passed from this world in 1872. You have any questions about anything?
We just went to the Pilot Knob battle.
Oh, really?
Fight a couple days ago.
It's very interesting.
So yeah, have you read all about it there? And,
My
yeah.
nephew Francis got himself drafted in 1864. He had to go to Pilot Knob because that was a military base. Signed some papers, said, here I am, I'm not dodging the draft or anything. And he got himself caught up in the Battle of Pilot Knob somehow. And some of the things he did, I don't know. We hadn't had much contact. You get mixed up in it. It's easy to get mixed up in things.
I was in France. I was the fifth of 9 children. 1791, shortly after the French Revolution, they were having a large slave rebellion. And so my slave morals packed me in a shipping crate, a shipping barrel, and actually shipped me into the United States, which saved my life and his probably. But anyway, so we get here. 1799, I open a mercantile up, which is behind what is now the Valley High School. And out of my home, I sell goods to the villagers. And the city still has the ledger that was mine that showed what I was selling, how much I was selling it for, and how I was paid, whether it was like a dozen eggs or paying cash, silver, however they were paying that. And being in the business, I was met lots of people, especially Jean-Baptiste Barbeau and his daughter. His daughter would become my future wife. And Ursula's daughter, Ursula's sister, was married to Jean-Baptiste Valet, who was the last French commandant of St. Genevieve. So then 1800, Ursula and I get married. We have 5 children. In addition to having my store, I also had a tannery just south of town. I also had a lead mine over now Washington County. And then in 1806, we sold our home and built our current home at the corner of Merchant and 4th Street. This is one of the premier examples of Norman Trust roofing system. Unfortunately, I didn't get to live there very long. I lived there, I believe, 7 years. I passed away at age 57. My wife, she never remarried. And we had 5 children. She passed away in 1843, and then we're both buried here with our freed slave Moros, who passed away in 1844 in the Great Flood in St. Genevieve. And then, as far as the kids go, after my wife passed away, one of them, I believe, went to Oklahoma. They never heard from him again. So what happened to him? Another one passed away. The 2 youngest, that the land was get into basically at the end, they went back to France, and their nephew, the one who went to Oklahoma, he went back to France with them, got a science degree, his art degree, went to medical school, and ended up coming back to St. Genevieve and practiced medicine here. So then over time, the family, the last person who owned the house donated the house to the Foundation for Restoration. where they now give tours.
So with our,
but you're trying to figure out which house it is.
Yeah, I am. No,
So
I
if you go
can't
straight
figure it
up,
out.
if you go straight up Merchant Street and you get to 4th Street, over the one right down the left.
So I am actually a steamboat victim. I had boarded the J.H. Dickey on a Monday, November 5th, 1862. The Civil War was going on, a couple years into the Civil War. So my family had decided that it would be safer for me to go on the steamboat than it would be horse and carriage. So I boarded, and Captain Musselman, he assured us that we would be fine, that there would be a few stops through the night, not to worry, that it was very normal, because they were a cargo ship as well. So we did. We stopped in Kimmswick, and we stopped in Herculaneum, and I knew that we would be stopping in St. Genevieve. My destination was Cape Girardeau, so I knew that in the morning is when we would reach my destination. So about 1 o'clock in the morning, we hit, and we hit hard. It jarred all of us out of our beds. We were scared. I started putting my clothes on. I helped another little girl who was terrified. And about 15 minutes after we had hit ground, an explosion and the boiler had blown. Well, I was dressed, so I opened the door. I was trying to see what did Captain Musselman want us to do. As I opened that door, they started screaming from the front of the boat, "Jump, jump, jump for your life." So I jumped, and I succumbed to the river. And about 7 a.m., daylight, they started pulling us out at Little Rock. And anyone that was retrieved at that point was brought here to the grave of the unknown. They sent up the steamboat Werner and found the J.H. Dickey about 10 miles north of St. Genevieve. So any of the survivors they brought back to here.
So the people that survived stayed on the boat, or did they jump in the water too?
I think that, I mean, there were survivors, and you know, as long as they jump and swim.
Well,
I mean, if you jump and don't swim.
In November though, and how cold that water would be, right?
Cold,
you know?
and it's the river. I don't know if y'all, I've spent time on the river and can tell you that I don't know.
Maybe that's something to hold on to or something, you know?
Yeah, they were terrified. They had to have been terrified. You know, I mean, for me to jump in a black, swirly, unknown thing.
And how old were you again? I didn't remember.
Actually, I don't really have any manifestual things to base my character, right? I just know that the facts are the boat hit ground, 1862, 1 in the morning, explosions, and I was a passenger who was terrified and succumbed to the river.
I wonder what kind of accommodations were passenger accommodations on a cargo ship?
It was a bunk room of 6. I've actually seen like pencil drawings of back then of some of the steamboats. J.H. Dickey was actually a pretty famous boat. In that Mark Twain did his riverboat captain training apprenticeship. Some of that time was spent on the J.H. Dickey, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a really nice boat for Mark Twain to be out hanging out. I mean, fancy.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Now, that's all the French are going to get out of me because I am not French. I am an Englishman.
Same.
I am an oddity in this town. Back in the 1700s, mid-1700s, I'm an oddity. I arrived here roughly right after the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War as we call it. So an Englishman in a French town is very unusual. I was born in the Tidewater area of Virginia. I have no idea what my last name is. I have no idea what my birth date is. I have no idea how old I am. My parents died when I was very, very young. The family that took me in, the only thing they gave me was the name Samuel. So when I got out here and they asked me what my name was, I said, Samuel. What is your surname? I don't know. So they said, okay, Samuel the Englishman. Some of the French would spit because I was English. They didn't care for the English too much, especially right after the 7 Years' War had just ended. So there was a little bit of a problem. Growing up in the Tidewater area, though, they thought I was going to become a sailor or have something to do with going to sea, working with the fishing boats, working with as a longshoreman, but something to do with the sea. I didn't like the water. I was better at hunting, fishing, and trapping. When I got old enough, I decided it was time to leave. So I did. I never looked back. I followed my nose to the northwest, found myself at the Appalachian Mountains. Crossed the mountains, found myself in the Ohio River Valley. My nose has a tendency to get me into trouble. It said go west, so I followed the river. Eventually I found myself at the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi River. I turned north, following my nose still, came across a French fort called Fort de Chartres. Like I said, this was right after the time frame of the 7 Years' War. Didn't think I'd get taken in, but they allowed me to come in. They eventually told me about a little village on the other side of the river. He said it was called St. Genevieve. He said it was a nice little town, you might like it. And I was like, all right, why not? I crossed the river, found the village, thought it was a nice little village. When the people of the village found out what I could do as far as hunting, fishing, trapping, I could make rope, I could make nets. So I had the skills of sailing, as well as I was able to hunt, fish, and trap. They asked me to stay. They thought I would be a good fit for them. I said, sure. They told me they had one rule, though, I would have to follow first. Change my religion. I was raised in the Anglican Church. This is a Catholic town. I would have to give up my birth religion to stay here. Thought about it. Came to the conclusion that I've been through worse. Crossing the Appalachian Mountains was one of them. Dealing with some of the native tribes along the river was another one. It could not be that hard to change my religion. So I changed my religion. They took me in and allowed me to stay. Part of what I had to do as well was join the militia. About this time, if you were about 15 years old and you could handle a pitchfork or a musket, the chances are you were serving in the militia. The militia got called up one time for something major the entire time I served with the militia. And that was in May of 1780. At the end of your Revolutionary War, there was a fight on this side. Not connected, it was somewhat connected to the Revolutionary War, but not exactly. Because it was between Great Britain and Spain. At the time, this town was underneath Spanish rule. The Spanish wanted to stop the British from taking control of the upper Mississippi River. We got called up. 60 members of this militia headed north, along with other members from further south down around New Madrid and in that direction. They all went north. But out of this town, 60 of us left. Arrived, went through the battle on the 26th of May, stayed there for a while until things settled down. When we were told we could leave, out of the 60 members, 59 of us came home. For militia, that was fantastic. Because usually we're cannon fodder. Put out there first, let them die, then the regular soldiers take over. So we came home 59 strong. When I got home, I returned to what I was doing. hunting, fishing, trapping, dealing with the natives in the area. Unfortunately, on one of my little trips out to one of the tribes and one of the villages, I brought something home with me that was going to end up putting me here in the cemetery. I don't know if it was yellow fever, scarlet fever, or the pox, but I picked up one of the three. 3 weeks after I got home from that trip, they were burying me up here in the cemetery. I have no headstone, no marker, nobody to grieve for me, because all my family is back in Virginia. What family I may have had or may not have had. So I was buried up here in the cemetery. Now what I'd like to tell my French spirit friends that live in this area is this little mound right here where I am buried, I believe I am buried, is proof that an Englishman can rise above the French. And that's the story of Samuel, the Englishman. And if you're French, please don't spit.
I don't mind at all. Anyway, my character is Joseph Herdick. Joseph Herdick was, you can see, was born in 1775 and died in 1852 here in St. Genevieve. Mr. Herdick was, unlike many people from St. Genevieve, not born in France or in Canada or in Germany. He was born in Switzerland. He was born in Lausanne, Switzerland, and came to America in 1796 with his mother and his sister. His mother became ill on the trip over from Switzerland and died in Baltimore, where they landed soon after they landed. He then went to Kentucky with his sister and began teaching. He, while he was in Switzerland, learned under a new teaching method called the Pestalozzi method. And Professor Pestalozzi actually, I like to think that he was a contemporary of Herdick's, and I like to think that Herdick was kind of his protege with this new method of teaching. So Herdick went to Kentucky, where he became a teacher. He taught in Kentucky for about 10 years, and then got a wild hair and decided to load up a pack team with merchandise and come to St. Genevieve to become a merchant. So traveled a pretty arduous track. I'm sure it was completely wooded and probably inhabited by not so friendly natives at the time. But he did make it to St. Genevieve. He was in the mercantile business for about 10 years. I don't think he did, he must not have done really well as a business person, so he fell back on teaching. And he opened what was called the Asylum, an institution of higher learning here in St. Gen, about 10 miles southwest of St. Genevieve. And it's a good thing that he did go back to teaching. I'm sure he didn't get paid any better than before, but he was such a good educator that some very prolific and famous people actually came out of his classes in this tiny little country school. 5 U.S. senators came out of his classroom. One of them being Lewis Lynn, who was Missouri's first U.S. senator, who's buried here in St. Genevieve in the Memorial Cemetery. He's actually been buried here twice. He's been buried 3 times. I think someone decided this cemetery wasn't maintained well enough, so they took his body away, and then they brought it back again for another interment. But he is buried here with 3. He had 7 children. He's buried here with 3 of his sons. He had 4 sons and 3 daughters. His son here, Lewis, lived to age 20. His son Joseph lived to only to 41, and his son Henry only to age 11. He had 3 daughters, all of whom lived to adulthood and had children of their own. And his one son, Charles, became a physician here in St. Genevieve, and his house is still on Main Street in St. Genevieve. It's now a bed and breakfast here in St. Genevieve. So I just wanted to say a little bit. His wife, he married a woman named Villar, Villars, or de Villar they call him. And while we can't find his wife buried here anywhere in the cemetery, his sister, Marie Villar, is buried in the next plot here right behind us. And she has a very interesting story for you to tell. One thing that I did notice that was curious when I first came to the cemetery is this is the father, right? So you would expect him to have like maybe a little bit beefier monument, and the other is a shorter one. And another thing I notice about it is the top doesn't quite fit right on it. It's a little too short. We think that his sister-in-law's, the top to her grave, his monument's been switched with this one.
Yeah, because it doesn't match.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a little bit too big over there, and it's a little bit too small here.
Oh my God. Swapped it out.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
But anyway,
the
sister-in-law has a very interesting history. Not so happy, but very scandalous. If you want to hear some scandal.
That sounds good.
So, by the way,
good evening. My name is Maureen Villa.
No?
I was born in 1790 and died in 1846. I lived my entire life, 56 years in this town. My mother was Marie Louise Valley. She died when I was just 11 from a lightning strike.
Anyway,
it's actually in the books as Thunder, but she died from a lightning
Joseph
strike.
Purdick.
My father was Louis
Gabriel
de Villers, and he was a commandant in the Spanish militia here in town. I had one brother and three sisters. Brother Joseph married Eleanor St. John Beauvais. She was the niece of wealthy merchant Vital. She did a lot of business over in Kaskaskia. My sister Euphrosie, we like to call her Eugenia, she actually married a John Price from Kentucky, and then he came here, he built the old tavern. And my sister Marie Mathilda married Pierre Charles Camille de Lassus. And while he doesn't have a big role to play, his brother Charles de Lassus de Louisiana does. He was the last lieutenant governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory from 1799 to 1803, and he did business with Lewis and Clark. Now, my sister Marceline married that character that you just talked to over there. And as you know, Joseph was an educator. He was also very popular, and he was asked to become the first warden of the First Masonic Lodge west of the Mississippi. It was called the Louisiana number 109, and meetings were held in the Janie Ziegler Green Tree Tavern. And then in 1833, he was asked by Governor Dunklin to head up a committee to start the first public school system in the state. And, as you know, we became a state in 1821. So in 1833, they're still trying to get a public school system. So the rest of my story, I always save it for the end because it's so sad. So when I was just 10, a gentleman came to town by the name of Andrew Henry. Now, he was just 15 at the time, but he was already a well-known trader and explorer. And he took a shine to me right away. 5 years later, he asked for my hand in marriage, and we had to get marriage bands. At the time, that was a proclamation, and you were required to get people to testify to your love and fidelity. In our case, 20 signatures because I'm Catholic and he was Protestant. That was very difficult at the time. He did get a judge, James Maxwell, to marry us on December 16 of 1805. There was a huge problem. He did not know, and I didn't know how to tell him at age 15 that I had been debauched by my brother-in-law, John Price. So I tell him on our wedding night. And he gets very angry. He leaves, and the next day he traveled to St. Louis and procured the services of a judge, Otto Schrader, to try to get a divorce. The problem being, there are no laws for that, and we are still under French,
They had 7
Spanish,
children,
and
and you can
English
see
rule.
3 of them are buried
So
here.
Schrader
His
gives him
son
what's
Joseph,
called a writ of
who lived to age
dedimus.
41.
He would give him
His
the
son Louis
ability
over
to
here, who
try
lived to
to
age 20. And his son
develop the law,
Henry, who only lived to age 11.
write some things out,
Uh,
and then
he
travel
had,
back to St. Louis, and then they
2
would work
daughters
together
who
to get the
lived
law
to
enacted,
adulthood
and we became divorced on July 4th
his
of
son
1807.
Joseph,
So, first divorce in the Upper Louisiana
oh
Territory.
gosh, now
The rest of the story is I spend the rest of my life living in shame with my relatives because I'm Catholic and I cannot remarry. He continues to do business with John Price and eventually goes west and opens the first trading post on the Continental Divide.
Anyway,
And at age
though
38,
she's not
he
buried
marries
here, and I
a
don't
Mary
know
Fleming.
where she's buried.
The rest of the
His
story.
wife was a member of the
Am I the first ghost?
I think you're the first ghost we've heard of.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Robin, Prospect K. Robbins. All my friends call me PK. Born in Pittsfield, Massachusetts in 1782. Growing up, I heard of this westward expansion the United States was involved in, and it intrigued me. So in 1810, I decided to head west. Went down the Ohio River to the Mississippi, north on the Mississippi, decided to go west on the Missouri. Stopped off at this little village called St. Charles. I worked as a school teacher. I was justice of the peace for a little while. 1813, I enlisted. Callaway's first company of Rangers. 1815, I was discharged. I had reached the rank of first lieutenant. A few weeks after my discharge, I received a letter from a gentleman by the name of William Rector. Mr. Rector was the Deputy Surveyor General in charge of the Upper Louisiana Territory. Mr. Rector expressed a meeting. So a few days later, I headed to St. Louis to his office. And at his office, I met another gentleman by the name of Joseph C. Brown. Mr. Rector explained he had some survey work he needed done. Seemed like the United States purchased 828,000 square miles for $15 million from France. The United States was in a real estate business. They needed to sell the property. To sell it, they had to have descriptions. Descriptions, they had to have a survey. Mr. Rector went on to explain our equipment. We acquire equipment, crew, supplies. The equipment consisted of a compass. A compass made of David Rittenhauser construction. Mr. Rittenhauser was the maker of fine scientific instruments. This compass, my line was described as a north-south line. This compass was to keep us running north. Mr. Brown's line was an east-west line. The compass was to keep him running west. We were to measure that line. We were to acquire a chain. It was a 4-pole chain. It's got 100 links. Every 10 links, it's got a tally. This is the midpoint, 50 links both ways. This is 40 links from one end. This is 40 links from the other end. Every 10 links is a tally. So you wouldn't have to measure each time at the end of a chain. You always knew where at least 10 chains were, 20 chains, 30. We required chaining pins. This is 11 chaining pins. I'll get into more details in a little bit. We require a crew. The crew consisted of 2 chainmen, 2 axemen, and a cook/hunter. Gather our supplies, and we were to meet on the bank of the Mississippi River in St. Louis later that fall. So we did. Loaded up all of our equipment, our supplies, crew, headed down to Mississippi. Stopped off at the St. Francis River. Mr. Brown got out, made camp. We floated on down to the Arkansas River, made camp. A couple days later, Mr. Brown headed west. The compass kept him heading west. We headed north. After approximately 55 miles, most of it swamp, we intersected Mr. Brown's line. That point is described as the initial point of the 5th principal meridian. From then on, we were to measure everything accurately. We were to measure every half mile, 40 chains, set a post, mark witness trees. 11 chaining pins. The first chaining pin was where you started. The core chainman would have 10 chaining pins. Stretch the chain out, pull it tight. Core chainman would drop a chaining pin. The rear chainman would pick it up. Walk up to where the fore chainman was. Stretch the chain out again. Hold it tight. Keep it level. He would drop another chaining pin and repeat that process. The compass was keep us running north. After the fore chainman ran out of his chaining pins, he would yell out. To keep track of outs, we had beads. Every out, you would throw a bead over your shoulder. There's different colors. After you went through one color, it'd gone 40 chains, half mile, set of posts. The United States wanted to survey everything off in square miles. They wanted to establish a township. A township is 6 miles square. So after we measured the first 6 miles, we were setting up the north line of the first township. That's described as Township 1 north, 1 east of the 5th principal meridian. Another 6 miles, set up another township. That's Township 2 north, 1 east of the 5th principal meridian. After 355 miles, 2 chains, we reached the Missouri bank, the river at the bank of the Missouri River. We had finished our job. I gathered up all my notes, headed back to St. Charles. Later on, I went back into St. Louis and dropped everything off to Mr. Richter. We were done. Went back to St. Charles, 1816. I married my wife, Elizabeth Evans. We eventually moved down here to St. Genevieve. Had 2 children, Jesse and Joseph. Joseph was the county coroner, grew up and he was the county coroner for a few years. He eventually moved back up to St. Charles. Jesse was circuit clerk and recorder for a few years. He was an attorney. He was a state rep. In May of 1847, my wife always wanted me to be baptized. I was baptized. June 3rd of 1847, I died and I'm buried somewhere in the cemetery. In real life, I am a surveyor and I'm the county surveyor for St. Jim. In 2006, the County Surveyors Association donated this bench on behalf of P.K. Robbins. And if you look close, you'll see where the 5th principal meridian runs through Missouri and Arkansas. That's cool. Just to give you an idea of the townships, we're in Township 38 North, range 9 east of the 5th principal meridian. So basically 38 times 6 north of the initial point, which is a swamp down in Arkansas. And then 9 east, 9 times 6 is where we are from the 5th principal meridian.
What did they do when they hit the Spanish land?
That didn't affect the 5th principal meridian, because before PK even got to the Missouri River, there were other surveyors coming in laying out the townships. And then once they got into the townships, they started to deal with the land grants. Now down most land grants are along the Mississippi River and along the Missouri River. And anywhere there was lead, like down in, I don't know if you're familiar with the Fredericktown area.
James Maxwell. He was born in Dublin in the year 1745. I became a Catholic priest, studied in Spain. He made my way over here and was asked to come to St. Genevieve. I arrived in the year 1797. As you know, the great Thomas Jefferson purchased this land, this Louisiana territory. So one of my jobs, not just to be the shepherd of all the people here in St. Genevieve with his family values, but to build an Irish community to teach the French how to speak English, Irish English at that. In order to teach them, we must build a school to help them. So, we built the academy. I'm familiar with the academy. It's still in existence today, although it is no longer a school. It is, however, the base of the school is said to be the oldest school building structure west the apparition mountains. Now, we opened that academy in 1807, or we began to open the academy in 1807. And it stayed open to the year 1814. You know why they closed in 1814? I died.
No.
See, after hearing confessions, after celebrating Mass, I was a 72-year-old priest, and my mode of transportation, of course, was by horse. I promptly fell off the horse, and I died. The academy would be open again in 1818. Now, you'll ask, Father, where is your tombstone? It's not here. I am the only spirit that you will meet tonight, not buried in this cemetery. You know where I'm buried? Under the altar of the church. So you may visit me there. But why I'm here? I'm here because at the end of the evening, as you walk around, you hear the stories of the people who say Genevieve. They too must rest. So at the end of the evening, I will do a final blessing to bless those spirits. And I bless you as well as you hear their stories.
Very good. Thank you.